Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So thanks for joining us. This is going to be fun. Here in Gaston Hall, for those of you who've never been here, this is a source of pride for Georgetowners. There have been on this stage kings and prime ministers and presidents and global leaders who've spoken to assembled crowds like yours over the centuries. So we're happy to welcome you here. We're very proud of this hall. And we're proud also of celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Sears Center for Global Real Estate, now called the Sears Center for Global Real Assets here at Georgetown, and this year's Luminaries event. We at Georgetown are a student-centered research university, and we are beaming with pride that the Sears Center has emerged as a leading place for students to study real estate with its innovative curriculum. There are a lot of hands-on experiences that students can take advantage of. And then there's a network of scholars and industry leaders and alumni. And for this reason, we are deeply grateful to Bob and Lauren Steers, who are where? Right there. Bob, stand up. Bob. We are grateful for their dedication and their philanthropic support, in essence, for their giving back to Georgetown. Bob brought a tremendous vision for what a global real estate program might look like here at Georgetown, and it was designed to capitalize on the strengths of our McDonough School of Business, our global character, our values, and the leadership of our alumni. And I wish for him and Lauren and the whole family the deep satisfaction and joy that comes from the knowledge that their philanthropy is changing the lives of countless young people over the decades. The center also has received generous support from alumni, some of whom are right here in the audience, and they've provided opportunities for real-world experiences by our students. They're enriching the lives of those young folks, and we're thankful for the alumni who've done this. Later, we'll hear from Bob when he introduces our Luminaries speakers this evening, John Gray, President and COO of Blackstone, and our beloved MSB alumnus, Joe Barata, head of Global Private Equity at Blackstone. We begin this evening with a panel conversation modified by Steers Center Director, Professor Matthew Seifer. And the title of this panel is Real Assets and Energy Innovation, Powering Our Future. Matt, I want to thank you for your leadership at the center and all the things you've done to guide the tremendous growth of this unit. So I'm going to turn it over to our Steers Center Director, Matthew Seifer.
All right, we having fun. Is everybody having fun yet, right? All right, well, I got to tell you, I'm excited. I've been looking forward to this day with this crowd for probably a year now. Bob and I started planning this, I think, at the cocktail reception from last year's event, and we're finally here. But I'm grateful to be here with you. I've seen so many of our alumni coming back, and that's when I know we're doing something right, is that we have people coming back and are making it a priority to be here. So I'm grateful for all of that. We're super excited about the 10th anniversary of the Steers Center. I mean, it's been a tremendous opportunity for us to create and to innovate, but always with the focus on the student. That's been our number one, our most important core value, is we care more about the student than anybody else, and that's what we'll always do. So, but we're always innovating, we're always moving, we're always changing, and you've heard that we're changing our name. It will be the Steers Center, of course, but it will be the Steers Center for Global Real Assets. And the reason for that is the view that we're seeing a convergence of real estate and infrastructure. And this panel is a perfect example of just that thing. And when we got everybody locked in here, I got really fired up about the conversation because I find it extraordinarily interesting. And we want to be talking about things that are innovative and new. And I can't imagine us having a better group of people to do just that. So I'm going to truncate bios. They're obviously in our online program. But to my immediate left is Andy Power. Andy is the CEO of Digital Realty, and in addition to being a member of their board, he has been in the company in a variety of capacities since 2015. He's also a board member of Americold. So, Andy, thanks for being here. We also have Taite McDonald to his left. Taite is a partner at Holland Knight, where she co-chairs their energy transition industry sector group and leads the clean tech funding and finance team. Taite has been successful to the tune of about $25 billion in non-dilutive grant funding, which we're going to learn about today, from the DOE for her client companies. We're certainly grateful that you're here, Taite. And then my man Clay Sell, all the way down to the end there, from Texas, CEO X Energy, a modular nuclear reactor fuel design company that is pioneering the modular nuclear reactor. So despite the fact that he lives in Dallas, they have a headquarters here in Rockville, so he spends a lot of his time up there. The firm recently raised about $500 million in Series C funding from the likes of, I don't know, Amazon and Citadel and Ares and some other groups. But I'm thrilled with all of you here, and I'm really grateful for you making the time. So if Andy, if you could lead us out here. So I think a lot of this is just trying to address the energy issue and the need for energy here, right? And so, of course, you're the CEO of a data center company, Digital Realty. And so how are you planning for the projected increase in electricity demand, particularly and I found this stat to be incredible, that the data center power usage may reach up to 12% of U.S. electricity by 2028, just data centers.
So let me just quickly set the table, and thank you for having me here. I'm honored. So Digital Realty has been a 20-year public company solely focused on data centers. We've been supporting customers on their digital transformation, cloud computing, and now AI journeys. The last one being something that we're really just getting started at. The last just handful of years, you've seen those two first demand trends, those waves of demand have not come to shore, and the AI is just surging on top of that, all in a backdrop where supply constraints, many of which are power generation, transmission, are just running literally out of gas. We've been in this for a while. On the heels of that, the most epicenter of was here just outside in Loudoun County. 2022 hit. They said no more power until basically the beginning of 2026 in the largest data center market in the world. So day one, we went to our initial assets we had. Let's go to the cupboards of our substations, our customers. What can we move around? What can we get more efficient? We've been continuing to scour not just the Americas, but also out the globe for incremental land holdings that have adjacency to idle power sources. We picked up some new sites to support our customers' growth. We've been activating infrastructure. Fortunately, we've been in this business for a while. We were talking about AI several years ago, but we had a business model that didn't rely on AI. And notwithstanding that, we have called a land bank of power that's approaching 4 gigawatts relative to an operating base of called 2.7, 2.8. And we've been activating that quickly. We've been pulling other levers to bring power in sooner, working on on-site natural gas turbine power generation, which I can expand upon. So really trying to activate what we already had as fast as possible for our customers, all real concrete demand trends, and then also planning ahead for the future for this long tail wave of demand.
Amazing. Thank you for that. So Taite, obviously you've got your finger on the policy pulse here, and you've obviously done tons of work with the Biden administration. So can you talk about what they did in terms of facilitating the energy transition, and then what are you expecting with where we're at right now? Like what if you can even hazard, right?
Yes, well, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here. Sorry, I'm laughing as I'm beginning to speak, but I think everyone understands why with everything going on. So the last few years have just been unbelievable in terms of triggering and facilitating the energy transition. I've been working in funding and financing with federal governments in the US for about 20 years. And it's been slow development. And then all of a sudden it was a rocket ship taking off. And so there was a lot to do. And we did a lot very quickly. We worked with the Biden administration. The Biden administration led a lot very quickly. And that really was the fuel that we needed an energy transition to really trigger this turning. And now, of course, we have a whole different side of energy transition, which I'm sure we'll get into more with the data center use load growing. So where we are right now, though, and where we ended is we got a significant amount of done in a very short period of time, 3 to 4 years. And we were really in a strong foundation for completing some projects, moving them forward. And then we had a strong foundation for policy for future projects. And really, finally, the US was looking at this like China has been, and that is government involvement in the energy transition. So that I think where we are right now, and we'll talk about it more throughout the remainder of this panel, is we really are at a crossroads that will be impacted by everything going on around us. However, we have such a strong foundation that was beyond my wildest imagination, quite frankly. So it's really ours to see what we can do with here.
Amazing, thank you for that. So Clay, we'll go to you. So in our organizing call, you said, that this audience is really entirely new to you, and you've not really spoken to this kind of a crowd. So who do you typically speak to, and what's the story that you tell, and how is it relevant to our real estate friends here?
Well, I speak to customers, and I speak to investors, and I speak to brilliant geniuses that we're recruiting into the company. And I'm on the circuit a little bit on the energy policy side, but it's, nuclear has gone through a tremendous transformation from a public perception standpoint, from a macro policy support standpoint, from a political support standpoint. And a lot of people, quite frankly, if you're old, your knowledge of nuclear power ties back to 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl. If you're younger, maybe your knowledge of nuclear power is associated with The Simpsons. But there's, nuclear power has evolved quite dramatically in the last few years. And there are a number of companies like ours, X-Energy, that are bringing new designs that have amazing capability, that have orders of magnitude increase in safety to the market right now. I've got our fuel form here. It has surrogate material in it. But it is, we put uranium in a graphite and ceramic bowl that will not melt under any circumstance. And this fuel is the foundation for a new generation of reactors that are literally meltdown proof. And when you start with a meltdown-proof reactor, it changes completely the way you think about constructing it, deploying it, where you can build it, and the functions that it can provide. So this technology is coming, and we've had strong support from some of the best customers we could imagine in Dow, in Amazon, and a world-class set of investors, some of who you mentioned in your opening comment.
So we'll come back to you, Tate. So what was the Biden administration's view of obviously modular nuclear and sort of nuclear generally, and then what do you think we're likely to see, and is it a continuation of the same or something completely different?
So the way where we are right now is we are in a 90-day transition period that has been beyond anything we have seen before for a transition period. I will say usually there is always a transition period like this, but this one has just been a little bit more. But during these significant transitions, I always like to say, what do we know versus what do we know? What don't we know yet, right? And what we know is both of the folks sitting next to me. We know there is a strong desire for the US to be a leader in nuclear, and we know we have load growth that we need to address. So at the end of the day, as much as there is a lot in the media right now about what the administration is doing with regard to transition and decreasing government, what I will say is Secretary Wright knows that there needs to be energy dominance. Yes, that's in the executive order, but the Department of Energy, despite what's going on in the media, they know they need to move forward with addressing these energy needs around us and leading in energy innovation. So that is where we are going, even though it may not look like that in what's presented in the media today. And I have strong confidence in that as an insider, based upon just what we are hearing behind the scenes from a lot of the Trump administration folks who have come back because they wanted to work on these two areas and many others moving forward. So it's still a very, very exciting time for energy development and energy deployment to support real estate assets and beyond.
So Clay, I'm going to go to you next, and I want to come back to you, Andy. But you talked, Clay, in our organizing call about, again, the 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, but you also referenced some stuff in Georgia and sort of the other issues when people think of nuclear. Can you talk about some of that, I think it was North Carolina was the other state where there was some stuff that was over budget and over time and those sorts of things?
Yeah, if the historic view of nuclear was there are safety and waste issues, those issues have largely been disposed of with public education. And people now know that nuclear power is the safest form of generation that's ever been deployed at scale in the world. 20% of the electricity in the US, 10% of the electricity worldwide, extraordinary safety record. The concern now is represented by the project called Plant Vogtle in Georgia, which was wildly over budget, wildly over schedule, $30+ billion to build 2 nuclear reactors along the Savannah River in Georgia. And so the view now about nuclear power is, yeah, it's safe and it's good and we need it and it's 24/7, but it's so hard to get built. And that was the motivation for our company. It's why we started with, all right, how do you make it easier to build? Well, you make it less complex. How can you make it less complex? You start with a reactor that can't melt down. When you start with a reactor that can't melt down, the types of equipment, the amount of steel, the amount of concrete, the safety-related systems that would operate on a typical plant, a lot of those can be eliminated simply because it is physically impossible for our plant to melt. So we have a much simpler design. We can build the large components in a factory, in a quality-controlled environment, ship them to the site, and assemble this plant in a way that's more similar to the way you would construct a natural gas combined cycle plant. Much shorter timelines with much less risk around execution. And so as we're looking at electricity demand going from roughly 2% growth a year to maybe 8% growth by 2030, 2035, that is going to require a phenomenal build out. And the economy cannot be constrained by the inability for us to generate electricity. It can't be. I mean, it's crazy to think about the growth of the US economy being constrained by a lack of electricity, but that is what we're facing. And so, the opportunity to get these next generation of plants built quickly, to build the supply chain around to do it, is just an extraordinary, extraordinary opportunity.
So you kind of alluded to this. There was a time within the full years that went to 5% a year. And we haven't seen 5% per year growth since post-World War II years. So am I wrong on any of that?
Yeah, electricity growth north of 5% those are emerging market type numbers. I mean, we saw it in the United States post-World War II. Nations around the world saw it as their economies were emerging and growing. But that's an incredible growth rate. And on top of that, a lot of the generation that's been built in the United States in the last 20 years is wind and solar. Those are assets with 15, 20, 25-year lives. None of those assets will be operating and generating electricity when we get to 2050 and we're all seeking to achieve our net zero objectives. They will all have been run, taken down, replaced, taken down, and replaced again before we get to 2050. And so the amount of infrastructure that we have to build is extraordinary. So if you can, yes, if it's more difficult to build a nuclear power plant on the front end, and I acknowledge that it is, that is an asset that will live for 60, 80, or 100 years to power the US economy.
So Andy, how do you think about just sort of power generally? And of your day, how much time do you focus on the power issue and where it's coming from, or my tenants, or constructing the building, or where does power factor into the order of priority and the things you think about?
So I've been inside the business for coming up on 10 years. The first 8, the power by and large just worked despite the growth of the industry from those demand trends I mentioned. Because we were in places where there's large lots of land, substations, and it could keep pace. The last 20% of my time at Digital, it's fully connected from the customer to the kilowatt, the megawatt, the gigawatt. And we can't have it unconnected, because any piece of land we look to procure and develop without the certainty of power really being there, it's a 1 or a 0 type outcome. So I've been spending time with the regulated utilities, with the co-ops, with those who operate the grid, and it's really about now triple checking or testing every assumption that should have worked previously to ensure the supply chain of the delivery of that, spinning up that AWS or Azure instance or using that ChatGPT can get activated, because the GPUs or the CPUs have arrived and stood up, and the substation is lit up, and we're connecting the dots all the way to the actuation of those electrons.
And how does nuclear factor into anything? Like and we're going to talk about timeline here. I want to talk about that for sure. But is that in the conversation for you at all?
So we're supporting about 5,000 customers in 50 metropolitan areas on 6 continents. So in France, I'm only talking about nuclear, right? And by and large, that's a country, other than minor hiccups during the pandemic of maintenance of those facilities, is exporting electrons to other countries in Europe. Here in the United States, I'm a full-throated supporter of it. I view it as a potential 2 birds, 1 stone instrument, where you can reduce transmission on as SMR basis by bringing closer to where the data centers, bringing the electrons closer to where the data centers and the data usage is. But quite frankly, the timelines, I'm in addition to being actively supporting and engaging and bringing that SMR timeline in, I've got a 2025 to 2030 playbook that just cannot wait, given this technological arms race that's transparent. And it really is an arms race, because and not to over-index on this on the backs of a very noisy news week, China did not follow the same power infrastructure build out that the United States had. When the United States was flatlining power, China was ramping power. So they are not going to have the problems that we're seeing. And it's not an easy problem, especially on short notice. Now, I know both the prior and the current administration are leading in, but this is something that cuts through EPA, state, local, power regulators, NIMBYisms of, do you want transmission lines running through your backyards? Quite frankly, a complex of power in the United States that feels that the political will of investing in the grid, which comes with a cost, and everyone comes on people's power bill, has been just not looked at for a while, when it's critical to power these facilities and get this technology going, because this technology is going to change the world.
So, Clay, we talked about China, and I'm going to maybe riff off something that Andy just said, that you had some stat in terms of what they've been doing on the nuclear side relative to us over the last X number of years. Could you maybe talk about that?
Well, they're crushing us. I mean, just to be brutally honest. they're building. There are 50-something nuclear power plants under construction around the world today, and 40 plus of those are in China. And there is that leads to, I think, one of the major motivations of the previous administration, a major motivation of the Trump energy dominance strategy, is this technology peer competition with China. Technology defines our national security posture against China. And so, we had an amazing American century in the last century, and the U.S. invented nuclear technology. We wrote the rules of nuclear commerce that were not perfect, but I think kept us in relatively good stead in the last century. If we don't get back in the business of first building here at home and then exporting to markets, China is going to write the rules of nuclear commerce for the next century. And that is a century that we will not be as happy living in. When China goes to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, and sells a plant on and they'll finance it. They will finance it and they will happily take it back whenever the country defaults. And then they own that grid and they own that influence for 100 years. And so there is a significant national security component to this administration's nuclear strategy, which has provided just additional energy beyond the demand from customers like Digital Realty to get back into the nuclear business. I will acknowledge that the timelines to build a nuclear plant are long. No plants are going to come on that will meaningfully contribute to supply before 2030. That's just a cold, hard reality. It takes time to get a multi-billion-dollar project built. And so there's going to be a lot of gas and renewables and batteries that supply the data centers between now and 2030. But we have to start now, and we have started with our customers at Amazon to build nuclear power plants that can be up and running and scaling throughout the decade of the 30s.
So what is it that is the time constraint? I mean, that just will require that much time to get done? Is it just the approvals? Is it getting you've talked about your supply chain issues. I mean, what is it, all of it?
Yeah, there is, the conventional wisdom is it's hard to get a nuclear power plant licensed in the United States. I don't accept that. It's hard if you write a poor application and don't do your work. But if you write a solid application with good analysis on a great design and you take it to the NRC, we expect to get a license in about 2.5 years, which is okay. Because the long lead on some of the materials that we're facing, particularly for the electrical sector, are in some cases over 4 years long.
So what takes 4 years for you to get?
In my case, there are 2 places in the world that build tubes to nuclear quality standards that you would put inside a steam generator to produce the steam to drive an electric turbine. 2 places in the world. We use 2 types of nuclear graphite, which I have to buy in Japan and France. Large vessels, large pressure vessels that are used in industrial processes, we have lost the capability to build those here in the United States, and I will very likely go to Korea to buy our large pressure vessels, and we have to get in line there with others. That's, the challenge on nuclear is the U.S. nuclear supply chain has largely disappeared. We are now dependent upon a global nuclear supply chain that is fairly thin. And, it will be rebuilt. Businesses do respond to market signals, but it just takes a little time. And that's what puts us in the beyond 2030 timeline for getting these plants built.
And just one more for you before we move on. So what is Amazon's rhetoric to you right now?
Well, Amazon is looking at demand growth just for their own data center portfolios, measured in the tens of gigawatts, in the next few years. And so, they recognize that if they were going to meet their decarbonization and clean power commitments, and they were going to have power on a 24/7 basis to power their data centers, that they would have to go nuclear. 2 years ago, Amazon was arguably, at best, agnostic on nuclear, if they weren't anti-nuclear. But they educated themselves when they were looking for solutions that would allow their business to thrive. Andy Jassy released his 2024 investor letter today, and he made a robust and full-throated support for aggressively investing and continuing to lean forward on their data center investments, in the decades to come. So they made a significant investment in our top company, in the technology company. They also did something that was unique in that they are investing directly, AWS is investing directly in power projects that they will construct with our technology. It's very different. A lot of people like PPAs. Digital Realty wants to sign PPAs. PPAs alone are not enough to get nuclear power plants built. It takes risk capital being deployed. And Amazon stepped up, and Dow, our other customer, has stepped up and said, we will provide the risk capital to actually build and effectively own these plants. And that's what it takes to get nuclear power plants built, particularly for these first of a kind. In future years, we build a number of them, we wring out the risk, we show the banks that they can be delivered on time, on budget, then the infrastructure capital guys will come in and you can finance these off a PPA. But now it takes risk capital from owners.
So Tate, we have this $25 billion in non-dilutive grant funding. Can you tell us what that is and how might that contribute to the production of nuclear?
Yeah, and loan funding, and it's actually the loan funding. So there is an ARDP grant.
I'm sorry, what is ARDP?
Oh, sorry. Actually, you know what? I'm not even going to say it because I might say it wrong. There's a nuclear grant program through the Department of Energy that supports significant grants to nuclear projects. So we are involved in one of those in a partner of X-Energy, as well as, but more importantly, because grant funding only goes so far for a project. Nuclear projects need the grant funding to get started. The other key aspect of this, though, is the DOE Loan Guarantee Program. The DOE Loan Guarantee Program is consistently seen as a little controversial. I strongly believe that during the second Trump administration, we will see this change. We need that program. It is a low cost to taxpayers. You are paying a very small subsidy, essentially an insurance premium, to use the government's balance sheet. So at a time where where an administration also wants government to be smaller and not to spend as much money, decrease the deficit, it is critical that we look at these different policy tools. There are new improvements to the DOE Loan Guarantee Program, too, that would address longstanding cost overruns with nuclear plants. And so it is critical at this time that we really look at not only grant programs. The US government has had a long history of grant programs. They are important, but we have to get more creative to address these issues. And that's really where we are. And we are at this point where we are being forced to be more creative with policy, and we are being forced to address the regulatory hurdles of nuclear too, because we will not be able to address these electricity concerns without looking at this more broadly. But before I turn it back, I think the one thing I want to say that both Andy and Clay have alluded on that I just want to put a very fine point on right now is this is hard. We know, like all of us who have been in these businesses, especially associated with energy transition or addressing energy growth right now, given all the things like Clay referenced a few associated with the different regulatory components. Andy referenced a few with EPA and how much all of these issues span to address these needs. You are spanning multiple agencies at a time where we are also going through agency staff and personnel cuts. So it is going to be hard moving forward, but we can do this. We can take where we left the end of the Biden administration and all the progress we made in that. The DOE Loan Guarantee Program, I've started with it from the beginning. I worked on the Tesla transaction and the other one that isn't named, that we don't want to name as much, and I've been working with that program for 20 years. It had a resurgence under Biden. They loaned 53 transactions. We have a platform for that now to now improve. Then we have alternative options that we can start looking at. So previously we looked at this grants, and grants are expensive, and the US government didn't want to do grants. We need to move on from that, and we need to look at this holistically. That's where the Trump administration is signaling that they are going to go. Our issue, of course, right now is you have tariffs the last few weeks, up and downs on that, and then you have also staff cuts across all of these agencies that are pivotal to moving these transactions forward. So we need to look at this as a next generation, and we need to step up and do what is hard in the nexus of policy to address these issues and be the world leaders that the US has been to date. And we're all working for the US to continue to be. Appreciate
that. So Andy, we heard Dow and Amazon talk about putting up the risk capital to try to advance some of this technology because their understanding of their own power needs is, I mean, you're a data center company, but are you thinking about any risk capital in some of these providers of energy to try to ensure that you're being as proactive as you can possibly be? And I'm not calling you not proactive, but is that something you guys are thinking about at all?
We're thinking both long-term and short-term about really trying to take matters into our own hands because the broader constituency, there's a lot of puzzle pieces to put together here. So on the long-term feature, which aligns more with nuclear innovation, energy efficiency and the like, we partnered with leading energy venture capital funds that are bringing us innovators to our doorstep for our infrastructure, for power solutions, for batteries, for a whole host of innovation that probably is not going to solve that near-term fix for us, but position us to be ready in how we incorporate that into our design, how we operate, how we orient that with our customers. Near term, we're taking matters in our own hands in terms of investing in bringing the electrons closer to where data centers need to thrive today. So piecing the easements together, investing in the turbines to create our own power plants for generation adjacent to the data centers. We've also done that in sustainable fashion, and I agree it's not a total solve for a substitute for where nuclear can be, but in certain parts of the world, like South Africa, we've invested in utility scale, call it close to 200 megawatt solar plants directly. Some of which of those projects will be called wheeled to the grid and then passed back to our data centers over long distances, and some of them will be essentially behind the meter. So we're making these investments because we can't wait for all the regulatory, the government, the utility frameworks to catch up in the activation of our infrastructure.
And so I'm going to stay with you for a minute, but I mean, you own stuff in Europe too, right? Did I make that up? So how is it different there, and what are your concerns or thoughts there relative to the US, and just maybe juxtapose that for me?
So it's different and similar in different veins, I would say. And you've seen, and some of the differences are playing out of what you've seen in the earliest days of AI here, which has been a very US-focused story in terms of relative to Europe. If you want to quickly scale infrastructure on expansive parcels of dirt with proximity to substations, you start here. In Europe, you have population distributions. You have certain countries where a huge portion of the populations are hubbed up against one or two cities, right? Which makes it very difficult for power resources to be built with proximity or transmission or distribution to be brought through. Europe is a union, not a country. Languages, there's a whole lot of nuances what makes activating infrastructure. Now, on the other hand, and you've seen this in the last weeks, you saw this at the beginning of this year, I was up, the president of France hosted a massive AI summit where they are wisening up to what they've seen as this US-China called mano a mano fight and saying we need to take this matters into our own hands, and we need to open up the regulatory framework. We need to find places where data centers and power can thrive together. We need to essentially use some of these things, like that example of France, where let's stop sending the electrons to other countries, let's start using them here. So I think you're going to see a little bit of a catch-up and a further globalization of this infrastructure build-out when it comes to power, when it comes to data center, and when it comes to AI.
So Clay, are you doing anything in Europe, and could you get out of the ground there quicker than you can in the US?
Yeah, we're developing a project in England. We're working with the UK government, and that's where we intend to really launch our European business from. But it'll be mid 2030s in the UK.
So help me with, when I think of the Georgia facility you reference, I think about just a monstrous plant, if you will, for, like just the physical plant. When I think of a modular nuclear reactor, it's described to me as the size of a tractor trailer, right? In terms of just the size of the modular. So why is the construction time different? I mean, in terms of that versus the large scale stuff in Georgia, shouldn't this be quicker? I mean, I get the policy stuff you can't control, but shouldn't it be quicker and then maybe a little easier to get your arms around cost and things like that? Just got to scale, or I'm not sure what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. The Plant Vogtle project was in construction for 15 years. And it was a stick-built, in-the-field construction, very little modularization. Every one of our major components is built in a factory and can be shipped over the road. Now, there's many shipments that have to be assembled. We still have to build a civil structure. It's still a multi-billion-dollar project.
Yeah.
But our construction timelines, our nuclear construction timelines are about 3 years. The footprint of our plant is much smaller. We have no emergency planning zone that has to be managed because, again, the plant can't melt down. So it's a much simpler enterprise. Yeah. But these are still mega projects.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not for kids. I mean, it takes big companies with big balance sheets to take this on, particularly for these first few plants.
So let's fast forward to 2030 or whenever we think this could be approved in the US, and Ashburn's sort of center of the universe for data center land, right? And, Andy rolls a modular nuclear into this on site and the neighborhood goes nuts, right? Like how does the NIMBY piece of this thing get dealt with? Because I don't know how you get over that hump.
I'll tell you something really interesting. We would never let what you describe happen.
Okay.
What you find is the closer you are to a nuclear power plant in the United States, the more popular they are and the more people want them. The first plant that we're building in Texas happens to be 30 miles from the South Texas project, a big 2-unit project in Texas. That community has had 40 years to become educated on the issues. They've had 40 years to learn to appreciate the economic benefits of having this company and this asset in their community. They've had 40 years of appreciating the tax benefits to their school district of having a big asset. And quite frankly, they love breathing the clean air. And so there are many, many places around our country today that will not only welcome a nuclear power plant, but will compete for the opportunity to host it. That's not every neighborhood. It's probably not in the middle of Reston Town Center or Ashburn, but we can get close. And this is going to continue to be, Northern Virginia is going to continue to be the center of gravity for data centers that, until some new center of gravity is built, over the next couple of decades.
So if you just sort of go to the logical extreme as to where your technology could go, describe what the future looks like with your technology readily accepted and utilized and made.
Well, we have an opportunity to build 4 units with Dow in the next few years And then in our partnership with Amazon, they want 5 gigawatts, which would be 64 of our XE100 reactors to be deployed in the next 15 years. That is an extraordinary opportunity to work with one of the largest and most innovative companies in the world to reinvent the way, even beyond what we've done, that we deploy nuclear power plants at scale. We're going to do that in a way, I believe, here's my prediction, that will show that the private capital markets, the infrastructure funds can come in and finance, along with perhaps DOE loan programs, finance these off a PPA on a go-forward basis, which gives us the opportunity to completely rethink the way the world thinks about 24/7 clean, carbon-free power. And that, it just becomes another tool in the toolbox for Andy. Do I want a gas plant with carbon capture and sequestration? Do I want solar and long-term batteries? Do I want a nuclear plant? And they can make the choice. They can make the investment. The infrastructure, the supply chain system will be set up and we'll be able to respond. And we intend at X-Energy to create a new asset class around small modular nuclear that can be developed and built by the private sector. That is what we will do at X-Energy. That's my prediction before I end my time there. And I'm only 57 years old.
Love it, man. Love that. Thank you for that. So Tate, the DOE just reissued a $900 million solicitation for a small modular nuclear reactor.
Yep.
Explain what that is. What's that money for? And that just happened on March 24th, so that's now.
No, and this is, what's important to note is there's funding remaining. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, so a lot of people get confused, the Inflation Reduction Act with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. What's critical here to note is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law was actually the realization of a lot of the realization of Trump's infrastructure laws and bills that he tried to pass multiple times. So, and then Biden did the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes a lot of the tax credits for these energy that these projects will rely upon. But there is significant funding. Actually, DOE, because it was an infrastructure law, Department of Energy actually got a lot more money out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law than they did IRA. Why this is important, why this answers your question, is this pot of funding, which is just a drop in the bucket. I mean, Clay will say any day, we need billions upon billions to do this. So $900 million is just really the research and is the next stage of small research and development here. But this is just an example of the funding that remains, and that's why this is so important to show the Trump administration is using the funding that remains for nuclear first and foremost out of the gate to support this small aspect of what's needed for nuclear. So think of it as like the beginning of what's to come. I think of it as the beginning of what's to come. They made some changes with it. There's this thing called community benefits that the Biden administration strongly relied upon in awarding grants. That is not going to be there anymore. What they really did was just take a solicitation from the Biden administration, strip out a few components of it, re-release it. But what's critical about that pot of money is it shows the direction of where we are going in supporting nuclear in particular. But the one thing I want to mention too that we are kind of getting at, I am realizing it sitting here on this panel, we have made a lot of progress on batteries. We haven't talked about battery storage a lot in this panel yet. We did make a lot of progress in battery storage the last few years, especially on supply chain too, in the US and starting to onshore more of that. And then so it's not only lithium ion batteries that go into your car, but also long duration energy storage that will support some of these assets. So I think it's important to note because we have so far to go with nuclear, but it shows that we're making progress and we're maintaining some US leadership that for the first 10, 15 years of my career, we were fine ceding to other countries and China. And now we're starting to see that maintaining of US leadership. And this solicitation in particular is important because it shows in a time when there's all these discussions about cutting programs and cutting funding. It shows that the Trump administration it's important to the Trump administration to maintain leadership in especially the nuclear market moving forward for the reasons we've discussed here.
Appreciate that. So just out of curiosity, Andy, what's the battery, what is your usage of batteries like and what you do day to day?
We use a lot of batteries because we have a UPS, an uninterruptible power source that has to bridge from when the lights goes out on the grid and the generators turn on. That you need batteries essentially bridging that handful of seconds or minutes in time. What I was going to say, actually, to your point, though, was although a controversial figure, one of the leading LLMs out there that many people are probably using day in, day out, equivalent to a ChatGPT, is using a battery solution, bootstrapping it with innovation to launch their product from nothing in the state of Tennessee, and now has one of the, so we're innovating on our infrastructure. We're not sitting around idly waiting for the nuclear or the next solution to show up at our doorstep.
Appreciate that. So I got maybe one more question for Clay, and then I've got a question for each of you. So Clay, I'm familiar with Westinghouse's technology. They're doing something on the nuclear side, and there's others, not just you. So how does your technology maybe differ from some of these other modular nuclear groups? Is it more or less the same? Obviously I understand the core element's the same, but where is the differentiation? And there's obviously a race here, right? So what's the group that likely wins and why?
Yeah, well, Westinghouse built the plants down in Georgia. And that is very standard, conventional nuclear power.
Yep.
It's just like all of the plants in France, all of the plants in the United States. They're called light water reactors. They use low enriched uranium. They put the uranium together in fuel bundles. It generates heat. That heat is evacuated with water. It's turned into steam. The steam spins a turbine. It makes electricity. Those plants have a number of great things about them, and they have a number of negative things about them. And the negative thing about it is that fuel, the core of the reactor, is very energy dense. And if you get a loss of coolant, the core can melt. Now, I told you earlier, nuclear has the greatest safety record of any technology. And the reason it does is because in that circumstance, we have a containment dome, we have lots of backup power, pumps, reservoirs of water. Everything operates to ensure that it doesn't turn into a terrible event. But those systems are very expensive. And so there are a number of companies in the field that responded to that and said, you know what, after 70 years, we think we can invent a better way to do this. And there are companies like ours, X-Energy, there are companies like Bill Gates' company TerraPower. We have different kind of technology solutions, but we're both called Generation 4, next generation technologies that have different approaches to safety that make our plants intrinsically safe. In my case, we wrap our fuel in ceramic and graphite that cannot melt because the materials don't melt at any temperature they would see in the reactor. We have a lower density core. We have a self-regulating core that if it heats up, the nuclear chain reaction automatically stops when it cools back down. That happens automatically. That happens due to physics. And so it's a very different design that can be built on a smaller footprint and offers greater functionality. This first plant that we're building for Dow, it's going to be both a combined heat and power plant because we can produce very high temperature steam with this robust fuel. So they're going to take half the production out of the plant in steam, use that to drive their industrial process, and then the rest of it they'll use to turn into electricity. But that's kind of the basic differences between the old generation and the new generation of plants.
Got that. Thank you for that. So we're almost out of time. I got the same question for each of you here. So we have a ton of students in the audience here. This is a great opportunity for them, and I'm thankful for that. And you all are looking out over the future in a very interesting time in our technological history, our country's history. What would you be excited about relative to career opportunities, right? So what would what would you tell your own kids? Like, this is coming and you should be in front of that. Or what is the exciting areas that you would be thinking about as a young person today?
Starts off.
Yours is the easy one.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, I wish I was 22. I think this is the most exciting period that you can possibly live in. Artificial intelligence, generative AI, will reinvent every aspect of our life. If you had asked your grandfather in 1990, what do you think the World Wide Web is going to do to business and opportunity? Chances are he wouldn't have given you a great answer. That's kind of like us today trying to describe what generative AI is going to mean. We've really yet to have a full idea of what it's going to mean for medicine. Can we literally cure all diseases? Can we do, how's it going to change everything? So that is so exciting. And it's going to require an immense amount of power, which is going to require a complete rethink and rebuild of how we generate power and get it to consumers, across our economy. And so whether you call it the energy transition or whether you call it, energy security and energy dominance, I think this sector is one of the most exciting things that we will see. It is the greatest business opportunity of my lifetime. I think it will be the greatest business opportunity of your lifetime. And if you have an interest in it or it sparks a passion, I would encourage you to pursue it. X Energy is right down the road, Rockville, Maryland.
I want to build on that a little bit because it's a little cliche to say, but at this point in time with the energy intersection, it's just such a pivotal time for the United States too, in innovation and moving forward and growth. We really are at this precipice. And with the combination of AI and the precipice of energy growth, it really creates an opportunity like that wasn't around when I started this aspect of my career. So it really is a shift. But I think what's more important to note is that in moving forward in your career and picking your career, it's really important to look at team building and building the right group of individuals, working with the right group of individuals, because some of this work is going to go away with AI, and we can integrate AI to solve these hard challenges that I referenced before. So I think it's really important to note that to really see the shift, really realize the shift, be a part of the shift, it is going to be hard, and we need to get smarter, and we need to innovate, and we need to build teams that can collaborate together. But we can do it, and that's going to be the most exciting work of our future for the next 20 years, 30 years, and 50 years.
Thank you for that. Andy, last word, too.
So other than putting a plug for Digital Realty, we're hiring all over the globe. And I echo both my co-presenters. I was thinking about this, getting ready for this. So I got two messages that I wish someone would have told me many years ago, but I still believe in today. Opportunity abounds, and adversity can always be overcome. I say that with a lot of experience from literally learning about investment banking from Bankers for Dummies book, weasel my way into a mid-year analyst class on the backs of the dot-com crash that happened to be real estate investment banking because they were hiring. That's the only reason. To not long after that, working on the IPO for Digital Realty 20 years ago as the analyst, building the model, fetching the coffee, when nobody knew what a data center was, the iPhone wasn't invented, and basically priced $3 below the pricing range, barely got public, to fast forward becoming on board 10 years ago. And along those ways, and I'll say this, I've shared the story with, I think you all are not here just to see us, I imagine. There's someone else too, you might be here to say. So we partner with Blackstone, a great, fantastic partner, and I shared this story with John when we were getting to know each other through the partnership. I said to him, along my way of my career, I interviewed when probably the earlier days of the real estate group he was building or leading, and many of those folks I interviewed with at the time, many have have gone have amazing careers and are still at Blackstone over decades now of time. And I didn't get the job, which was crushing, of course, at the time. But on the heels of that, I was able to pick myself up, survive a financial crisis, get other jobs, and eventually I got to partner with Blackstone about a year ago. So I eventually find my way to work there. So opportunities abound, and adversity is always able to be overcome.
Look, I've had a heck of a time, as I always do. I really enjoy these opportunities. So can you all join me in thanking our panel here today?